Hello, folks. We're getting ready to start. Could everyone please mute their phones?
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well today. It's a beautiful day today. Hopefully it's beautiful wherever you all are. But my name is Terrence Todd. I am the Executive Director for the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. And today we have an awesome show set up for you. It's like our second one in a row. We had began last month with talking about broadband and access and stuff like that. But today we're going to get a little bit more deep into the discussion around connecting the dots for communities of color with academics, broadband, and culture. With us today, we have some wonderful people that have decided to join in with us as a group of panelists. With us today, we have Maha Abdelkader. She is the Education Program Specialist for the Office of English Language Acquisition. We also have with us today Mr. Orman Ferez. He's a group leader for the Office of Effective Educator Development Programs for the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education for the U.S. Department of Education. Next, we have Ms. Jovan Hicks. She's an area manager for in state legislation. She deals with state regulatory and legislative affairs for AT&T. She also serves on the board of directors for Everyone On, which is a national nonprofit. And then we also have Mr. Adam Safer. He's the director of the Office of Educational Technology here at the U.S. Department of Education. So again, welcome aboard, everybody. Hopefully this virtual roundtable here at the Department of Ed is one that is very useful to you. Hopefully that it'll be very resourceful for you as well, for your respective programs that you're leading in your respective parts of the country. And so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started because we want to respect everyone's time. Just before we do that, though, I do want to thank our team here at the Department of Education, as well as the Secretary, for allowing us to have this space and to continue to connect with our stakeholders from all over the country to highlight some of the things that's going on out in the world of education to make things a lot better for our students all over this country. I also want to thank our technology team, the people behind the scene, Adrian and Kevin, and just everyone here at the department that makes all of this work. It brings everything together so that way we can have a very powerful and impactful event here today. And so we're not going to be before you long, but we certainly have an awesome program with a lot of information to share with you guys today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with Maha Abdelkader. I'm going to allow her to go ahead and introduce herself and kind of talk about some of the work that she's doing. So Maha, go ahead and have at it.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from today. I know we have a national audience. My name is Maha Abdelkader. I'm an education program specialist for the Office of English Language Acquisition. Our office provides national leadership to focus on the academic success and language development of English learners and immigrant students across the country. I joined the department recently this spring. I've worked with English learners for many, many years, and I was a former English learner myself. My native language is Arabic. I'm happy to join you today.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate that. Next, let's go with Mr. Orman Ferez. How are you, sir? Uh-oh, I think you're muted. I think you're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thanks. Go ahead.
Right. My name is Orman Ferez. And are you hearing, I'm sorry, are you hearing a little bit of background noise?
No, not me. I don't hear background noise.
Okay. All right, great. No, I'm hearing a little bit of, I'm sorry, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
We hear you.
Jeez. Technology. All right, well, again, my name is Orman Ferez, and I work here at the U.S. Department of Education in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education's Effective Educator Development Division. I know that's a mouthful. I think I looked at all the different titles today, and I think that I probably will end up winning the contest for the longest title. I've been at the department for a little over 4 years now. Prior to that, I came over from the D.C. Office of the State Superintendent of Education, where I spent about 9 years doing a lot of different types of work related to educator effectiveness, educator preparation, educator development, et cetera. So I brought a lot of that to the Department of Education in 2016, where I've really just had a phenomenal experience after coming to the department. The Effective Educator Development Division at the department is really all things educators. We manage a range of discretionary grant programs aimed at supporting innovative solutions for preparing, developing, and incentivizing effective educators. In my specific role at AIR, I oversee the Teacher and School for Incentive Fund program, which is a discretionary grant program that's really aimed at supporting local education agencies and state education agencies and implementing innovative human capital approaches, particularly in higher schools. Our hope is that through the program, we're able to ensure that all students have access to excellent educators, and we'll be able to positively impact student achievement across the board. And then I also have the distinct pleasure of overseeing 2 really unique non-grant programs at the department as well. Those are the Teach to Lead and School Ambassador Fellowship programs. Through both programs, we're able to engage directly with practitioners in the field by providing opportunities for teacher leadership and engagement in national education initiatives, and by providing a space for the voice of teachers, administrators, and other school leaders to be heard and to really inform our work. And so with that, that's me in a nutshell. I'm really, really excited to be here. I'm thankful for the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion this afternoon.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Next, I'm going to call on Ms. Javon Hicks.
Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Sure.
My career really has come full circle. I started in education as a middle school math and science teacher in Los Angeles and Oakland, California, and then went on to school and to sort of expand into the business world to affect change in education from a social entrepreneurship perspective. And from that experience, I learned that there are many ways to affect change in the K through 12 and higher education space, which led me to AT&T. And I currently work in our California State Regulatory and Legislative Affairs organization, where we manage a number of dockets, tariffs, things of that nature, aimed at advancing our technology, providing more opportunities for folks to have access to the internet. I also serve on the board of directors of Everyone On, which is a national nonprofit that aims to connect low-income households to affordable internet, affordable devices, and skills training to really shift and the trajectory of their lives. And so I'm happy to represent both organizations here today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Javon. Glad to have you. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Adam Safer, if you could please kind of share who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Terrace. I'm also very grateful for the opportunity to be here. For most of the last 20 years, I've been buying, selling tech-enabled services companies. I'm a lawyer and investment banker by training. I joined the department 4 months ago as the director of the Office of Educational Technology. The office was established by Congress in the 90s, in the early days of the internet, really to ensure that technology is being used in service of learning, teaching, and assessment to its maximum capability, and certainly within the mission of the Department of Education to empower people. So very much look forward to today's discussion. Our office has a couple of projects that we're concentrating on right now, especially as it relates to empowering people to own their own educational record. We're working on projects. On projects related to broadband access, and ensuring that it's that it's well distributed, and issues of home access have certainly become larger ones that we've been getting involved with. And some of the policy, we're a policy shop and a communications shop, so we get very involved in trying to identify policy opportunities to apply to the real world. And there's definitely quite a bit going on in the broadband space right now. So I very much look forward to this conversation.
Wonderful, thank you. So now that we have each and every one of our presenters that have actually introduced themselves and the work that they do, I need to make for sure that I add in here that this is actually being recorded. So for those of you who have joined us, obviously you've given consent to that, but also this is closed to the news, to the media. And so if you are a member of the media, if you would please kindly exit this session at this time. And so that way we're going to move forward with our questions. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So Adam, I'm going to start with you and ask you this question in regards to technology. So how do we create access to broadband and integrate technology in a meaningful manner in the classrooms and at home to support students?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, it really starts with the technology being in service of the person's learning, in service of the teacher. So that involves, when you think about it, you have to think about the technology itself, of course, but you really have to think about its use and its application and its training and provisioning, for it, like any other tool, to be used in a sustainable manner. So, getting the right people to the table who can provision that and are incented to provision that. There's, sometimes it's a straight up money issue. It's a straight up resource issue. Mm-hmm. And getting those resources marshaled and invested in the, what's often in education is a very local decision or a school-based decision, and making sure that the skills are there, for the planning around the technology itself. And then, it's trying things. It's trying things that, knowing what's leading edge and knowing what's bleeding edge when it comes to the, the technology itself. Again, it's always in service of a person in a workflow, and sometimes that can get lost organizationally. Mm-hmm. So we do quite a bit in our research, whether we're looking at ed tech effectiveness or looking at how ed tech is used and planned. Building those skills in people is what it boils down to at the end of the day.
Yeah, and same question to Ms. Javon Hicks. Oh, I think you're muted.
My apologies. I think that's a great question, and I think that question has been amplified with COVID-19 entering the scene. There is an immediate need for schools to be connected, for students to be connected. And there's a number of ways that on the AT&T side that we're working to address some of those issues. I think The first would be through our Access from AT&T program. That's our low-cost broadband. And through that program, we have expanded our qualifiers, which originally was SNAP and in California SSI. But we expanded to include the free and reduced lunch program. We have different income brackets that will qualify you as well. And that effort was really in direct response to the need at the time, and continues to be the need. We also, waive all of our home internet overage fees. We realize that people need to use the internet a lot more often than is needed, particularly students. So we've worked in that capacity. And we've also worked with a number of school districts to provide hotspots in areas where maybe connectivity is a challenge. And we've used different modalities. We've used buses. We've used some new hotspot technologies that we've trialed. And so I think really this time has created a charge for ISPs, internet service providers, to work both internally and externally to stretch a bit and go above and beyond, I think, what we even felt we were capable of, because this really is greater than a bottom line. It really is about providing an essential service to people in need during a time where the need is very great.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, matter of fact, if you could, while I still have you on this topic, because you mentioned getting it to areas that connectivity is a challenge, talk to us a little bit about the Everyone On program that you're part of.
Sure. So Everyone On has been working in this space for quite some time, and they are a relatively small team, but their reach is expansive. And they partner with a number of both federal and local agencies to get the internet into every home in the US. And the way that they work to achieve that goal is by partnering with organizations, ISPs like AT&T and several others, to have awareness events, on-site enrollment events. They work directly with school districts. They work with other national organizations that have a target of the school population. And on their website, I think what's really useful, a really useful tool for those who are looking for internet solutions, they have an internet locator tool on their website where you can type in your zip code and it will tell you what is available to you at your location. And they also provide opportunities to acquire low cost, or even some cases free, laptop computers. And then taking it a step further, because I think the issue of connectivity is layered. You're not going to fix it with just access to broadband, because there is a huge gap when we start talking about access to affordable devices. And then once you have those devices and you have the broadband, do you have the skills to really utilize it to your benefit? And so they've really married all of those issues, and they're working to address them collectively. And their work is really admirable. We've seen great success in many cities. A few of the partners that they work with, they work with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They work on the Connect Home USA initiative. So they do work in a number of sectors, and it has proven to be very successful.
Wonderful. Thank you for that explanation and kind of going through that. So it's good that they're having some success with that, because I know Adam, I believe it was Adam and I, before, we've had conversation in reference to how in the rural communities, if you will, like you mentioned about connectivity, rural communities are faced with a whole nother challenge. I mean, you know, first of all, because they're so far away from your urban centers and whatnot, many of them are, you know, the use of, for example, the use of electricity and how they are utilizing resources out in the rural communities could probably be even more of a challenge for them to get connected into broadband and stuff like that. But Anne, kind of speak to that a little bit, because I know you mentioned before that going into rural communities, the cost of getting that info or that tool to them, if you will. What was the actual going rate for that again? I know you mentioned that.
Well, yeah, definitely to help frame the problem for both rural and urban communities, as Jovan was saying, you know, there's 56 million K through 12 students in this country,
right.
And the studies that are out there now that Congress is considering and otherwise, you know, point to 9 million of those students having no access, period, and 15 million of them either having no access or insufficient access. It's not fast enough. They don't have a dedicated device. They don't have access to a dedicated device in order to be able to do school from home. So with that as the big frame of the problem, it can differ, you know, in rural communities, and there's been huge cross-government efforts that my office participates in to help, you know, bring the actual infrastructure there that otherwise might be challenging, whether that's, you know, lower cost loans or straight up grants. Interestingly, from the Department of Agriculture, managed through something called the American Broadband Initiative, and it's going to differ by each community, you know, what the cost may be to bring broadband, but in bringing that and helping to bring those down, there's been massive efforts. Likewise, in urban areas, and we can talk about opportunity zones, which cover both, and there's some additional incentives for investors, but they're for investment into those communities. There's also, you know, there's also the affordability issue in groups like Everyone On and Education Superhighway and some others have been addressing the problem in the school context, either to connect schools and libraries, and as COVID has put an extra light on what was already framed as the homework gap in order to participate in education. You know, currently a lot of the, you know, having a reliable internet connection is critical, and a lot of people just don't have that at home. So the schools and libraries have been equipped through programs like E-Rate. Now, whether E-Rate or some other programs that the FCC has like Lifeline, you know, can be utilized for that. Opportunity zones themselves, about can they bring in all kinds of infrastructure, connectivity and broadband being part of it, but, you know, the schools themselves, the teachers themselves using opportunity zone funding for that. That's an area that the department has actually, in line, you know, with the administration, put a lot of muscle and hustle into.
Good, thanks for that. Thanks for that. The next question is this, and I want to start with Mr. Armand Ferez. So what would you say that, what are some culturally competent best practices and or models have you found to be effective in engaging communities of color from the work that you do? Uh-oh, are you on mute?
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, my apologies. I was going away too. No, that's a great question. And you know, we all hear and have heard, I should say, you know, time and time again about how important, you know, teachers are to the academic achievement of students. And we recognize that, you know, having a really effective, high quality educator in the classroom is going to help to ensure that a student is going to be achieving at their, you know, to their highest potential. But it can't be it can't be overstated, I'm sorry, how important it is also that that students have educators who, who look like them and sort of reflect their values and reflect their cultures and can relate to them. And that's something that I think is critically important, but often goes overlooked. And so I think particularly in this time right now, we know that kids are home. I'm thinking about my 16-year-old son who's, who's sort of engaging in virtual learning, at this stage. I think in the beginning it was probably, it sounded like a pretty good deal. And now, as time has passed, we're entering, moving into October now. And it's a challenge, for him. It's a challenge for a lot of kids. And kids are feeling like they're missing out. They're missing their friends. They're missing out on significant pieces of, of their lives, when you really think about it, academically and personally. And so, I think it's important that, as we're thinking about, like, how do we fill classrooms with educators that are not just effective in helping them to move the needle academically, but that we're also thinking about, how are we making sure that we have folks in classrooms that can actually relate to these students and can actually empathize with, what they're dealing with, emotionally, as well as, helping them to get great grades and achieve academically. And so there's a lot of work that, that's happening that I could certainly highlight, particularly given the portfolio of grant programs that I oversee and that are run through the Effective Educator Development Division as a whole, that are really specific to trying to make sure that we're solving that problem. We're seeing a lot of work right now. A lot of our grantees are really digging into ensuring that social emotional learning is an aspect of the work that is sort of front and center, making sure that students not just, again, are achieving academically, but that they're developing the skills and the attributes that are going to help them to be successful academically, but also in life in general. And so that's just sort of a smattering of the work that we see that's pretty successful right now. But I think in general, making sure that those different boxes are checked is something that we have to make sure that we're focusing on front and center.
Good, thank you. Maha, same question to you.
Thank you. Well, I'll add to that one of the most important practices for culturally responsive school environments or instruction and interactions with families and diverse communities is to first and foremost recognize the diversity that exists among the groups of students that we're talking about. And we often speak about students using labels because that's how data is disaggregated when we're looking at student achievement. And that's important because disaggregating data and looking at specific demographic student groups and specific service groups, for example, English learners. We need to be looking at that data in order to identify some of the barriers that are causing challenges for these students, the barriers and the inequities that exist that would otherwise be masked if we're not breaking down the data this way. So that's why we use these terms. We'll say English learners or Hispanic students, and but we need to recognize that even those small groups within the larger group of students are extremely diverse. So we need to continue to look at the diversity that exists within these groups, the linguistic diversity, the socioeconomic diversity, their demographic diversity, and certainly the diversity of access to technology, because that's now a very important tool for education. And so that's one of the things that our office, the Office of English Language Acquisition, really tries to focus professional learning and conversations in the field around how diverse are these students, how do we meet the unique individual needs of students and families, because there isn't one strategy or one practice that can broadly support an entire group, right? That's not best practice. One of the functions that our office does is disseminate research and information and strategies and practice briefs. And we do that through our National Clearinghouse for English Language Acquisition. We have so many data sources that demonstrate students' performance, their academic background, and we publish fact sheets, data fact sheets that will show diversity of language use, where our English learners are nationally across the country, and whether they're in urban or rural settings, and their academic achievement and so on. And these fact sheets really help us slice the data in so many different ways, and continue to point out that, you know, in order to serve students well, we need to know them on an individual level. So while we may be having a conversation like this one, nationally looking at national data or speaking about students broadly, we know that our listeners will be focusing in on their students as individuals, their families as individuals in the community, in order to serve them best. When this COVID pandemic began in early spring, it was a really abrupt transition from face-to-face learning to distance and remote learning, and relying very abruptly on technology solutions and technology access that was, in some communities, it was already available. There were resources and curriculum that was developed for 21st century learners that was really leveraging online engagement for students, but it wasn't consistent across every school, and certainly hasn't been the experience for every student. And so the abrupt shift really... Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We had to temporarily mute. There was noise in the background. If you are speaking, please unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Okay, Maha, you're back on. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Oh, where did she go?
Hello?
Okay.
Hi. Is this better?
Yeah, we can hear you. You're okay. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. So what I'm saying is, you know, there was already a shift to online learning and distance learning solutions before this pandemic began. It just a shift for all schools to do this all at once, and all teachers to shift to completely providing services for students remotely happened very abruptly. We're in a better place now, starting this school year, with information and lessons learned from what happened in the spring. But one thing we really learned and continue to highlight is that this is an opportunity to provide more differentiated services for students. This is an opportunity to leverage universal design for students, like providing multiple means for students to access information, providing multiple means for students to respond and demonstrate their knowledge is really done very well online, right? There are great options that teachers can leverage and engage to provide students with different ways to demonstrate their knowledge. And that's a unique situation that we should be leveraging. There are certainly different resources to be able to do that well. And on our website, on our Ancela website, we have a page dedicated to ensuring continuity of learning and operations within remote settings. We have toolkits for families and resources for teachers, and also highlighting the diversity of the developmental level and the impact that remote learning has on different students. For example, early learners, really need that personal engagement with peers and with adults as they're learning and developing their self-regulation and their academic language skills. Students who are transitioning from level to level, we know this has been particularly difficult for students who are transitioning to high school, but transitioning out of high school to post-secondary learning. And so, you know, we provide a variety of different resources to support the instructional needs of these diverse learners, all on our website. I know Monique will share the link. And we also have been collaborating with the Institute of Educational Sciences Regional Educational Labs. They have provided a variety of different resources to be able to support students across the continuum of digital access. And so I'll stop there and share more as we continue with
Terrace, if I may, on some of the great points that Maha was making. You know, there's 14,000 school districts in this country, and there's just an incredible and beautiful diversity amongst those and within those. And so, you know, at the Department of Education, the types of studies and products and policies that we get involved in, you know, are meant to be applied, you know, with decision-making, you know, locally, and with, you know, resources that can supplement and not supplant what's going on locally. But so we really think at the Office of Educational Technology in terms of principles, and with technology being a support for learning, we ask the questions, well, what's good learning? What are we supporting? You know, and some of the principles, when we studied it, we've done a lot around EdTech effectiveness and looking at the learning. It is, you know, it's really people's prior understandings and meeting them where they are, which may have cultural components, and having them learn to think critically, you know, about them, to question, to go deeper, connecting their learning, you know, to the real world and to others in their community, leveraging those social interactions, having the kind of feedback. So I bring up all these things because those are the, you know, what the academic community knows works. And from a technology and access standpoint, we think about how can we facilitate that in a way that is, you know, equitable.
Great, Adam. I'm glad that you added that, because that leads me into my next question. So what are some of the successes that you all are seeing for school districts and infrastructure for embedding technology and engaging students with it? What are some of the successes you all are seeing there?
Well,
go ahead. You can start, Adam. Go ahead.
No, please. Yeah, sure. You know, it's Lindsay, California is one that very much took a competency-based learning first approach, and then how can the technology support that, and how can we have a planning process around that to have, you know, sustainable technology that is in service of you know, an assertive and purposeful learning regime. It's an example where they, you know, paid a lot of concerted effort to it, and we believe got it right. And that's a, you know, almost 100% free and reduced lunch, you know, community. We've seen some success in either project-based, where you're actually bringing in the creative tools and tying them to the community. There's been some things with maker spaces where projects have actually been produced that have helped the community and have further engaged the schools in servicing the community. I mean, 3D printing prosthetic hands is an example that we've seen that was pretty you know, inspiring and transformative in that community. The Summit Charter Schools, for example, we've seen they've done some work, but there's almost too many to count. And the folks on the, you know, the folks can talk there from a programmatic basis. There's a lot that the department has done, and other groups do to try to, you know, fund and resource and catalyze innovation whether it's some of the teacher development programs, that can be spoken to, or otherwise, it's a multifaceted problem that the department has a lot of involvement in trying to help.
Yeah. So same question for Javon. What about you, Javon? Again, some of the successes for school districts that, with their infrastructure that are embedded into technology and engaging students with it. What are some of the things that you're seeing out there?
Sure. Everyone has contributed really great points. I think when I think about the Black community in particular and some of the challenges that we face, it's layered, and it requires both public sector programs and private sector investments. It is not you can't throw a program at it.
Yeah.
It really needs, it's comprehensive. It needs to be comprehensive. And so, and technology is one piece of it. And so I'll start with technology, some of the things that are working or in the direction of solving some real challenging problems. I'll call out North Carolina. Governor Cooper there announced a partnership with AT&T where, along with the Energy Foundation, where we would provide hotspots through school buses. And I mentioned that previously. We've seen that model work in other communities. In California in particular, I think that was the start of that whole school bus equipped with broadband. That's sort of where it initiated, and we've seen that model work. And so we've rolled it out in other cities. In San Jose, California, the County Office of Education, they've equipped their district with 8,000 hotspots using some new technology. It's called AT&T United Express 2 hotspots. And it allows up to 15 devices to be connected in a household. Because the issue, when you talk about broadband, we obviously have an issue getting the infrastructure out to more rural areas.
Yeah.
We also have pockets in urban communities where the speeds are not adequate, particularly with in this time that we're experiencing now, where in a single household you need to be able to connect 4, 5, 6, however many devices at a time. If you have children, school-age children who need to access the internet, and you have working parents in the household. And so we find that that's a good solution. We also have other solutions that we know work in more rural areas, such as fixed wireless, for example. Using wireless technology directly into the home to provide greater speeds and more capacity. So, I think, like I mentioned from the beginning, I think our issue, technology is one arm, economics is another issue. When we talk about education, I don't recall who brought up the point, but it is imperative that our students, and by our I mean Black students, are able to see and experience culturally competent teachers who are going to expose them to opportunities and see things that they would not ordinarily see, that will spark their interest to do more and to achieve at a higher level and to see beyond whatever their circumstances are. That's critical and essential. And I think in other communities, that's just sort of embedded into the culture, and the culture both within the community and within the school community, that they will be exposed to opportunities that will spark an interest. I find that in communities of color, particularly Black communities, the opportunities are much more limited. And there is a wealth of untapped brilliance in our community. And so I think we need to start looking broader. I think the whole idea of sort of a wraparound approach, how do we take an entire child? How do we build an entire child? How do we build an entire, how do we build and support an entire college student to set them on the right path? I think these are questions that have been asked for quite some time, and I think there's a lot of organizations that are working to assist in their piece of this whole puzzle.
Yeah, wonderful, well put. Orman, you want to add to that? I saw you smile on a few things. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
My apologies, I keep forgetting. Yeah, I wanted to actually
Matter of fact, before you start, I want to add something funny. You don't look a day over 21, by the way.
I appreciate that. I'm very flattered. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I wanted to actually circle back to a point that that Adam made about Lindsay Unified School District, and Lindsay is actually one of our current teacher and school leader incentive program grantees. And I think one of the things that they did that was pretty phenomenal and sort of sparked a thought that I had was around the whole idea of what do we find to be successful. And what we found overwhelmingly to be successful when you talk about integrating technology into educational settings is when there is sufficient planning that goes into it, when there is sufficient, discussion and understanding of what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And so, what we found time and time again is that, and I use this language pretty loosely with my team at the department, but, we have tools, we are sometimes inundated with tools. We're inundated with platforms and different data gathering mechanisms and what have you. And, many times, we'll try something out and it ends up falling by the wayside. And I think the same thing happens in schools all the time. And so I think it's really important, and something that I know for a fact that happened at Lindsay was that they did a whole sort of, from the ground up, reimagining of how they wanted to use technology in a number of different, settings. And once they understood the problem, they built solutions around that. They communicated with stakeholders. They made sure that educators were on board. And it's not just happening in Lindsay. I just use that example because Adam brought it up, and I was just having a conversation about Lindsay with colleagues this morning. But it's happening all across the country. And I think that ultimately, if there's anything that I could really convey about, how to best achieve success in sort of integrating technological solutions within, whether it's classroom settings or at the district level or at the school level, it really is having that solid plan of what is it that we want to do, what is the problem of practice that we're trying to solve, what is our theory of action, and what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And so when you have that in place, we find that schools and districts are far more successful with implementing the change they're trying to seek.
Wonderful.
There's 4 questions that we ask, again, with technology as only a bit player in the bigger picture, right? So, 1, does it empower people? 2, does it enhance the educational experience? 3, is it optimized as an asset? And 4, does it advance privacy and security? So when you look at those 4 questions, and each one of them has 100 questions that you can dig into underneath, we believe it helps orient to what we're doing in the first place, because each one of those questions, the answer could be yes, and the answer could be no, and the answer could be maybe, right? So it's in doing that kind of planning process, that we're talking about, that can certainly help make sure it's in service of the learner at the end of the day, not necessarily the institution, but the learner, and bringing the institution along with the learner.
Gotcha. So my next question is for you guys is this, and maybe you can touch it. Some of you touched on it a little bit more, but I want to dive a little bit more into this. So what role do you all believe that families and community members play in supporting student academic success, especially around technology and in your predominantly, I guess, ethnic minority populations, if you will. So what role do you guys think they play? Or what can they play? What role can they play for the most part? I'll start with Javon.
Sure, families are critical.
Yeah.
They're essential. And, I'll just speak from my work with everyone on and as an educator. I think the vast majority of families want to see their kids succeed academically.
Yeah.
And just succeed, period, right? And I think that there's a desire to give them better, more than what we had, and expose them to more. But I think, there can be some limitations. When you have working parents who are having to rely heavily on their kids to, in the case that Maha mentioned, if English is a second language, they are having to rely on their kids to really be independent in many ways with their schooling. And if you are, in this exercise where everyone is virtual, that you have to have internet, your kids have to get on to their Zoom calls or whatever platform they may use to access school. But you may not be technologically savvy enough to help your kids navigate that space. And if you have young children, it's even more difficult. So I think there needs to be support on many fronts. And that's where I think the work that everyone on is doing is so critical. Because in addition to connecting families to affordable internet, which is essential, they have the devices, but they also need that skills training, which is critical. And it needs to be available in languages that they understand, in certain cases. And they need to have a resource to circle back to when they have questions that are going to come up as you expand your technological reach. And so I think that's where, just in this climate, I think that's where families are important, and that's where organizations can step in and help fill some of those gaps.
Nice, thank you. Maha.
Hi, yes. First I wanted to highlight that this, again, that abrupt shift to distance learning because of the COVID circumstances, it highlighted inequities that already existed in learning environments for students. It didn't just create, there were certainly barriers to access to technology that added challenges for families, but there were many issues that existed prior to that are still a problem. So looking at technology solutions alone without addressing the inequities that already existed is not going to really be helpful for students and families. And so if we were to use a language example, for example, if students are only asked to demonstrate their knowledge and learning through a written response, for example, students who are developing language won't have, for them, they're effectively shut out of instruction if it's so heavily relying on limited language without scaffolds or supports. Okay? So providing a technology solution and asking students to type online is still, the barrier still exists, right? So we need to look at the technology solutions and use technology in effective ways. And now that we are focused on communities that are marginalized, and we have our attention focused on that, these are opportunities to address the issues, the challenges that existed before. And remembering that when we look at student achievement and we talk about student performance, that information about student tells us a story of their learning experience. So if there's a challenge or a barrier or a gap in learning, it's not attributed to the student. It is not attributed to a community. You know, we can't say an entire group of students performs this way because that this is something that is attributed to the student. No, the performance and achievement is attributed to what the instructional arrangements that are provided to the students. So if we want to eliminate gaps, we have to look at the barriers in the learning environment, and look at you know, what is going to provide the student access, what is going to increase the students' participation, and particularly opportunities for students to engage in discussion and debate about what they're learning. Because we know that students who develop those skills while they are in school go on to be able to use those skills for post-secondary settings and in careers. And so if students are effectively shut out of experiences to discuss and debate and argue and use academic discourse and academic language and an academic register, that only widens the opportunity gap for them when they are trying to transfer those skills in careers. And so whether it's face-to-face or online digital learning or distant learning using other modes and methods, there have to be opportunities for all learners to be able to engage in academic discussions, academic language use, and discussion routines that are going to develop their cognitive skills as well as their academic language skills.
Wonderful.
I'll address the question about parents' importance in education. It's essential and foundational. And the pandemic has certainly put more parents in situations where they have the children doing their education in the same household or in the same guardianship if they don't have parents, and having to know about it, provision it, take part in the partnership with the school that would be ideal. Just the skills and exposure of parents, you know, to this is unprecedented. And, you know, in some ways, you know, parents have become woke to issues that they otherwise, you know, may not have known about either specifically and technically,
Yeah.
or conceptually about how their kids are getting educated and what choices they have and what limitations that, you know, exist, you know, within the institutions where the kids currently may be. So that in and of itself, you know, creates opportunities for dialogue and for transformation.
Yeah, I'm glad some of you mentioned barriers too, because for some kids, you know, home is a barrier. You know what I mean? Because it's less structured, if you will, and like you just mentioned, Adam, sometimes there's the learning gap, there's the communication gap, and so those are things where I think as professionals or if you will, are experts in this space, I think we got to become a little bit more bold and more creative of how we can actually meet the needs of everybody. Because again, remember in education, there's no one size fit all, you know, but certainly we can give a jab at trying to make for sure that everybody is at the table and that their kids are actually being successful based on what's being provided to them from our end of things as well. So, but anyway, let me go to the next question because I know pretty soon we're going to be going into our Q&A session. So let me ask you guys this. So how can we, I know we talked about rural and urban communities. So how can we support both in ensuring the fact that students have the access to resources? How can we ensure that both are done? Let me start with Armand.
Sure. And so my answer may be a little brief because with respect, particularly respect to technology, my experience is not as deep as some of my colleagues here. But one of the things that I think in general that we can always do we can always do a better job of is the way that we sort of from the department side is how we communicate opportunities, and I think that's one of the pieces of feedback that we get most often whenever we run, say, a grant competition or we put on some type of event for the community, is that we're just not in those communities enough, particularly for rural communities, and so that there seems to be a disparity of sort of access to the opportunities. So one of the things that we know that we have to do, particularly in the grant side of things, is just to make sure that when we have opportunities available, we are really getting out into those communities and making sure that we are announcing things in such a way that it penetrates, those groups in ways that it currently is not doing. And so I think that's important. One of the other things that we do a tremendous amount of, but potentially not enough in certain communities, is just in terms of the technical assistance and the professional learning opportunities that we provide. And so again, just really making sure that we're working with groups, whether it's in urban settings or rural settings or somewhere in between, just to make sure that everyone has access to all the different types of opportunities that we have available to us.
Good. Next for Javon. Javon, you mentioned earlier, and I want you to answer this question as well, but you mentioned earlier about the great work that AT&T is doing, especially with the buses, right? Who actually, did you touch base on who actually pays for that? Is that something, a service that families actually pay for to use for access, or how does that get paid for?
That is a free service to its end user. But there are a number of ways that it is paid for. AT&T has committed to $10 million before 2020
Nice.
to expand on our broadband technology. And that is one program that is included in that.
Okay.
But I think there's also some existing programs where there's an opportunity to enhance it. In rural communities in particular, of course, we have the CAF2 program, the Connect America Fund initiative, and that aims to reach over 1.1 million homes in rural communities, and also small businesses in those communities as well.
Nice.
But I think we need to look at maybe revamping that, given some of the immediate challenges that we have. We also have our Firstnet program, which allows first responders to have the bandwidth and the broadband to be able to communicate more seamlessly. That's critical in those urban communities where those sorts of communications can be interrupted if the infrastructure is not there. But I think, and to tie it into maybe some of the urban communities, we've been sort of championing this idea of broadband maps. When we look at some of the gaps with broadband, we tend to look very macro at the census block level. But I think we need to sort of take a more micro view of some of these areas where broadband may not have the speeds that are necessary. We may not have the capabilities at this time to provide the level of broadband that community needs. And so I think, and there are a number of reasons why certain speeds or certain infrastructure cannot be built out in certain communities. And I think we need to start looking at maybe some smarter policies around how we build out our infrastructure and how do we get broadband into these communities. I think it can start first at the policy level. And I think, another program that comes to mind is, of course, the Lifeline program, which is an FCC program that supports internet to low-income households. And I think now we need to sort of look at some of those qualifiers. I think there can be in these programs, and I think about Access from AT&T. This is a program that's open to anyone that falls into any one of these qualifiers, so long as our 21 state wireline broadband infrastructure reaches your location. You automatically qualify for this $10 a month internet service. But we see, even though we've had great success with the program, there are still a large number of households who do not have the internet, who are eligible and within our network. So I think that that issue is also very layered. I think there's a resistance in certain communities, particularly ESL communities, where they don't want to provide certain information for fear of it being shared with outside agencies. We run into those sort of issues. We've run into issues, not so much now that we've expanded our qualifiers, but SNAP and SSI in California, there are some gray areas there where you still have people that are really struggling financially, who really would be considered at or below the poverty level, but do not qualify for some of these other federal programs that would qualify them for low-cost internet. So I think there's many different barriers that I think keep people who would be considered low-income individuals or households from accessing this internet. And what we're trying to do is remove those barriers.
Yeah. Oh, were you done? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're trying to remove those barriers in a number of existing programs, and also working with our legislators to remove some of the barriers at the policy level.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Adam.
Yeah, may I share the screen? Because I think I might be able to extend on some of the great points that Jovan was making, as well as address some of the questions that I've seen in the chat.
Okay. Adrian, can we do that?
Yes. Second.
Is my screen up? Do people see the question, how can investment in education transform an opportunity zone?
Yes.
Okay, great. So there's 8,700 opportunity zones. It's a relatively new program. It's certainly not the only program that is place-based, that address some of the types of issues that we talk about. The Opportunity Zone program basically looks at, gives investors the ability to defer their capital gains if they invest in designated opportunity zones. The states choose what their opportunity zones are. They tend to be on the lowest 25% economically within their states. These are some ideas that, and some of it has happened about, how an investor can invest into an opportunity zone. And building schools, connecting people, empowering workers, and supporting innovation. Below are some of the federal grants within the ones that say ED or Department of Education ones. Through our rulemaking process, we actually give preferences, competitive preferences in our competitive grants to opportunity zones. To put it in perspective, most of what we do is title money that's formula-based, that already ties to low-income areas for a big point. But this is competitive grant preferences that may include innovation and transformative stuff, done one at a time when people apply for grants. And it's everything from helping to build charter schools, magnet schools. Title 4A has some technology components, but it also has some safe and healthy schools components and other ones. We do have a small business innovation research program that runs through IES, which is our research department. We talked about E-Rate and Lifeline. Those are two of the FCC programs E-rate primarily has funded connectivity to schools and to libraries, something like 98%. There's multiple layers of that in the E-rate program. Lifeline is more about connecting individuals. Empowering workers. There's a whole section of the Department of Ed called OCTAE, which is all about career and technical education. They oversee the Perkins Innovation and Modernization grants. That has a lot to do, with workforce preparation and Gear Up. I bring all this up because, these are the types of resources where the federal government gets involved in trying to invest and catalyze, but we're only a piece of the picture. So to put in perspective, expenditures on K-12 schools, roughly $800 billion a year. We're about 30-40 billion of it, depending on how you count it. So we're a piece of the puzzle. Private sector, especially in COVID times, we've seen a lot of stepping up. Whether it's a nonprofit organization or corporate social responsibility, and coordinating that and attaching those policies and possibilities to real programs, is the challenge, everyday challenge.
Wonderful, thanks, Adam. So,
Sure.
Did anybody else want to add anything before we go into the Q&A session, real quick?
Hi, yes, this is
Okay.
Maha. I just wanted to add and connect the last question about urban and districts and communities in urban settings and suburban settings or rural settings, connect that with engaging families, just wrap it all together to say that family engagement has always been important. But now it's even more critical because the learning environment is in the home for many students.
Yeah.
So we really need to think about, if we want all families to be engaged, we need to again recognize why some communities might have challenges with participation and access, and not again attribute it broadly to stereotypes that may exist around certain communities, because what we're really talking about is we're trying to engage families in our model of parent engagement, of an education system that's been structured in a specific way and designed for many decades to serve certain communities. And so we know all families care about their children and their learners, and they want to set them up for success. So if we want to engage families, we need to make clear what it is that model of engagement is that we're looking at, right? It's not that they don't want to participate or support their children. We need to make clear what is it that we're focused on, what is going to help the student be successful, and really connect it to academic parameters and academic success for the students. So for example, and we really need to curate our message and align the information that we're streamline the information that's going out to families, because that will make it much more, all the more easy to really meet the needs of different communities. So if we're pushing out so much content and information, just because we think we want everyone to know everything, right? Then it's much more challenging to translate for families who need the information in a specific language, or much more challenging to reach communities that we can't access through technology, to send all this information out in packets. So what is important at this point in time as students are starting the school year? And in what order do we need to share information with families and communities? That'll make it easy for us to be nimble with what we're sharing and really individualize it for communities and families. So right now, students starting the school year, coming out from a context that was very unusual for them, routines are important. Building stamina around being sustained reading, sustained writing, sustained access to an online learning module. Building stamina around that is important. Having dedicated spaces for the student to work uninterrupted, uninterrupted and focus on learning and structuring their day in a specific way so that they're getting up and they're moving and they're, all those things are really important right now and important for families to support and encourage at home. But we don't want families to be the teacher, right? We're not going to push out the curriculum to families and say, here, teach this to the student because now learning is happening at home. No, we want them to be partners in supporting what the teachers are doing in whatever format they're providing it to the student.
Yeah.
And being focused on that message and being very specific and curating it and streamlining the information is a good thing to do, so a good practice so we can then either translate, interpret, or provide information in different means for different families. A resource that we often share with our stakeholders is called a dual capacity framework, dual capacity building framework. And that focuses on, we want to develop the capacity of our educators and our staff and our teachers and all our stakeholders to be able to really recognize the individual needs of students and families and recognize the assets that families bring and really focus on what it is that we need to help families know, but and simultaneously building the capacities of families. So that has been a framework that's really useful in professional development for schools and for planning out family engagement activities.
Wonderful, thank you, Maha. So let me get into a few of the questions that some of our viewing audience may have, and then we're going to close it out and with some closing remarks after that, and then we'll go from there, and then we'll end the day with that. So let me get started with one question. It asks, how do you navigate working with families? And I'll start with Maha. How do you navigate working with families that prefer not to use technology for personal or spiritual beliefs?
I think we need to first and foremost respect what some of the family's concerns around any issue that they express to us. So families are expressing a preference for communication. That we need to recognize and respect that preference and accommodate it to the best that we can. And as I said, if we are able to focus our message, our content, and curate information or learning experiences for students focused on what's important, what is the standard that we're trying to develop learning around, what is the information that we're trying to communicate to families. We know what it is that is focused and important. We can develop an alternate pathway for families who prefer to receive this information or engage in a specific way. Universal design is the best approach, and providing multiple ways for families to engage and for students to access is always the best approach.
Gotcha. What about you, Javon? You want to tackle that as well?
I think it falls under the category of meeting people where they are, and
Gotcha.
And so, prior to COVID, when we did not have as many restrictions around how we can interact with people, we held a lot of on-site enrollment event at housing authorities, because the whole notion of, we know you don't have the internet, but go to our website and sign up for our program for internet service. It's just not feasible, right? You have to meet people where they are. And so I think when we could use some of our collateral to send out, we sent out bulk flyers and other promotional materials to school districts, to organizations like National PTA, who are very heavily in schools throughout our country, who would deliver these materials. We're also a big partner with FCCLA, OCA, and so I think that as with any time you are promoting a program, you have to take into consideration that different people have different needs. One of our key part of our key demographics are the elderly. So, we understand in that community often they use the Postal Service to do a lot of their communications. So we do a lot of mailings so that they're not having to rely on some outside source of support to get them to a library, or to depend on a family member or caretaker to help them sign up. So those are just some of the ways that as a company, not just with AT&T, but also through everyone on, that we really, there's a lot of thought around how do we reach people who otherwise don't have the technology through what would be the typical channels.
Gotcha. Okay, which leads me into my next question. I think, Adam, you're going to jump in on this too. So it's that one of the questions is that some students or parents don't understand, right, that they can qualify for programs like Access. So they only think in terms of hotspots. Are there specific hotspot programs that could be utilized by low-tech access areas?
Yeah, I'll defer to Jovan a little bit about Everyone On as a resource that has consolidated, information about programs and has done a good job at that. We are soon to be putting out a parent and family guide that does bring a number of resources for that. But it's really, the school is one place to turn. There are programs such as Lifeline. There are, community programs as well that vary, by each community. And, as far as a map for those, I think Everyone On does a pretty good job at that.
Okay. All right, Jovan, he deferred to you.
I mean, I'm just going to echo what he said. I think a really great resource for anyone who's who's at ground zero and wants to figure out what's available to me. What do I qualify for? The Everyone On website is a great place to start because it will direct you to whatever your needs may be. If you and you can also find out about the Access from AT&T program through their website. But if you want more detailed information, you can always visit the Access from AT&T website, which is AT&T www.att.access, and you can find out more information about that program in particular. And I think it's important to mention, we are a large corporation. We have huge brand identity, and but I would be remiss if I did not mention that this effort is not about getting people to be AT&T customers and Access from AT&T customers. This is about getting people on the internet. And there are other ISPs. If Access is not available in your area, there are other ISPs that offer similar programs that can get you connected to the internet for a discounted rate.
Nice, thank you for that. I'm glad you specified that. This is not like an AT&T commercial kind of a thing.
Right.
No, but that's good that you mentioned that, because I think it's really important. Let me ask you this, Jovan, and I think Adam or whoever else may chime in on this. This is my question now. So in reference to your the utilization of the buses, if you will, were there any barriers to doing that for you guys? I don't know if it was something that you may have had to connect with FCC or somebody on that. What barriers do you see that people may have, or did you have any barriers to being able to do that in different communities?
I'll speak from what I know about the program. That particular product is not a product that I work directly on. However, just from having to stay abreast of what's going on in this space of connectivity, I will say that it can be very effective in a particular community where the need is concentrated. But there may be, when you go into a school district, and for example, we have school districts where they've reached out and said, all of our students qualify for free or reduced lunch program. So, the need is within this area here, and they can show us these are the boundaries for our school district. Can you send some buses into this community so that people can connect? And for the most part, connectivity is relatively easy because it works just like any other Wi-Fi sort of setup. But in certain cases, if your house is not physically close enough to the bus, then you may have to come closer to where the connectivity originates. And so I think, it's not a perfect solution, but I think that, we work very hard to try to, again, to meet people where they are and help where we can, and fill some of those gaps.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So,
Terrace, I'll address a little bit. We've seen in some rural communities where they want to put, use the farm infrastructure to put antennae and repeaters and things to enable access. And there is regulatory aspects to it, oftentimes on the local level and the permitting and the FCC and so on and so forth. So that definitely needs to be, provisioned for in any kind of access planning. One of the things that Jovan mentioned earlier when it comes to data, I think that was a really important point about broadband maps. At this point, roughly speaking, if you look at some of the maps that the FCC puts out, they may lead you to believe that there's full internet access in a community if a limited number of people can connect in that community, to put it bluntly and directly. So, there are some surveys that are being done on behalf of that states are doing in their education communities as it relates to home access and broadband access to try to match those maps to the surveys and data collection and find where there may be differences and maybe change a little bit of the way that the data is collected and utilized by the FCC. So, there's definitely, constant innovation and scrutiny being given, at that level. And that's one thing that, communities should be aware of it when they're looking to do their planning and their, provisioning around building networks, whether it's for education, for telehealth, just for commerce, for what, for whatever.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. All right, folks, we are coming to a close. Let's do a speed round, and this speed round will consist of this last question. How do you predict the next 5 years for schools, colleges, and the impact of technology on the education sector? Let's start with Orman.
I'm guessing you can hear me. I think I think we're sort of we're sort of there. I think we are sort of at a tipping point where everyone's reality has been changed. I don't see how we go back 100% at this stage. So I think schools are going to be really thinking about how they can retool to incorporate some type of virtual, some type of hybrid, learning mechanisms. I think institutions have probably for a long time been kind of moving in that direction. I think there's been a lot of, movement in that direction. And so this is speed round, so I'll leave it there. But I think ultimately that we're sort of moving in that direction where folks see what the possibilities are. And I think it's going to drive what the outcomes look like in the future.
Wonderful, thank you. Maha. What do you think? Next 5 years, what do you predict?
I'll go back to what I said earlier. I feel like this year is really accelerating the pivot to practices that we had already identified were important for education. The shift to 21st century learning skills, a shift to use of technology in education, a shift to equitable access. And so it's just accelerating that pivot and moving us forward more quickly than we would have naturally done it without this abrupt transition. It's going to help us all as educators focus on what's truly important, curate what our messaging, focus instruction on specific outcomes, and really look at to monitor students' progress in multiple ways in an ongoing basis, which I think is a really good thing for diverse learners.
Nice. Javon, what do you think next 5 years?
Sure, I think in this space, we've been ringing the bell for a long time, trying to get more attention and more action around digital equity and inclusion. And I think now we're forced to put action to our words. And so I'm excited about what the next 5 years are going to hold. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the CARES Act affects this space, having more funding to roll out some innovative programs. Many companies like AT&T are matching a lot of these dollars. And so I think, where money flows, I think change starts to happen. And so I'm optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic. In how we can continue to support low-income individuals who do not have access to technology.
And Mr. Cipher, next 5 years, sir.
I think the next 5 years are going to be ones of tremendous innovation in education at all levels, whether it's K through 12, career and technical, higher ed, and the old saw, necessity is the mother of invention. There is major economic, crisis, if you will, in terms of some of the revenue sources that have traditionally funded education. I mean, we're the wealthiest country in the world, and we have deep resources. But when you look at the strain that's put on them, like Maha said, in some of these things that have been studied and looked at and innovated, to modernize education, to the 21st century. There's still a lot of the model at all levels that goes back to the 18th and 19th century, and some transformative actions around that definitely on the table and being looked at, and a lot of muscle and thought is going into that in real time. So I think there's going to be tremendous innovation. I think based on fundamental principles, if we get the organization and have the right conversations about what we all agree on, makes sense to drive individuals, empower them and drive them forward.
Wonderful. Hey, I'm with you guys. I'm definitely a pretty optimistic person, and I think all things happen for a reason, and I see us headed in that way, and hopefully and prayerfully we have the right people on board and the right investments on that are being, I guess, provided to be able to go in that direction that we needed to go. So you guys were awesome. I want to thank you guys very much for taking your time to be our panelist of experts, if you will. I think today was very resourceful, and I want to thank all of our viewing audience and those who participated today as well. Also our team here at the Department of Education and Secretary DeVos for allowing us to really highlight some of these concerns that we're having all across the country. And our team here, Adrian and Kevin and the whole team that, was making this possible for the most part. Monique, I really want to thank her as well. Monique Tassan, she's our senior advisor here for the initiative, and she kind of helps pull everything together for us and get everyone on board and makes this happen. So anyway, I just want to thank everybody. I think this was awesome, very resourceful. It's definitely a topic, you guys, that is an ongoing topic. So be on standby. We may be calling on you again at some point because it is an ongoing concern, and those are some of the things that we want to get resolved throughout the country. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and close out this session. And again, thank you guys very much for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Wait, get that window back. So I want to be able to share with you exactly the links that we were clicking on. It showed us all, that's sort of like,